Oh, what an awesome responsibility to be meaningful few minutes in the life of a student on their own path. Who knows, in all humility, what they'll carry from what I would like to help them with. Holistically, not only pianistically. In a way, the technique is the expression of the precision towards a goal, which has to be backed up by a conviction, a level of confidence, regardless of the fact that you change mind, but you build something, be it an ephemeral structure, and I help them construct it. Unlike other arts, live music performance is the most demanding, because it's constantly to be restarted from scratch. A painter doesn't repaint, a sculptor doesn't resculpt, a filmmaker doesn't redo the film. Every time they show it, watch it, display it. It's in the eye of the beholder. It's in the way it's understood, in the way it's misunderstood, like a book that is read in the silence between the text and the brain, through the soul and the heart of a reader who appropriates it for themselves. Here we have a level of translation between the notation. Of course, that is where hopefully I can be of help to convey what are the intentions of the composer. Of course, all this is very subjective. It's my truth, it's not even theirs, but they come with an intuition. And I think that is the most precious flame for their candle through their own life. So what they will learn should not be too heavy to carry, or shouldn't shut down their candle light. Their original spark towards something that perhaps they can't even define what they need from the teacher, towards better playing the piece, better understanding the style, better shaping the statement, better controlling the touch, better organizing the texture, better choosing what to bring and what to bring less out, where, when, how the elements overlap or interrupt. Is it fragmented? Is it continuous? Is it layered? Is it all at the same time? Is there a right and wrong way, or just different paths? Do you want to explore them all? And once you explore them all, then inevitably you have to make a choice. Perhaps it's the choice of the instant that is made between the circumstances of the instrument on which you play, because pianists don't play the piano, they play all the pianos, on any pianos. And they have to do it with all the subtlety of what they expect from the piece, or what the piece expects from them. And they have to be able to be reliable in their touch in order to be confident in their musical drive towards where it leads them, in terms of each sentence, each phrase, each agogic direction of the punctuation, how you organize the rhetorical discourse. Of course you can use, and some do, imitations. They listen to recordings. Very often I notice that they start a piece after they have heard it in order to like it and then to study it. And I encourage them to take more time, even if it's difficult, because not everybody is an easily natural sight reader of music, to read the music they want to choose between this sonata and that, between this prelude and fugue and that, this etude, this nocturne, this whatever it is, because I find that, of course, naturally, the initial approach to sounds is through the ear. That's what the mother tongue is. Other languages are through the book. And since we only have the book, or so to say, the text or the notation, whichever form it came to us, that connects us to the dead composer's intent, which was intended for its own time period, geographically restricted as well. And we find in it universal meaning to play it 1700s into the 1900s, now in the 20,000s. Who knows how many more millennia people will play Bach and will rediscover it and it will mean to them. But it doesn't have to be what it meant when it was done, except that the way it was done corresponded to the ways people accepted music to be made in the way they learned it. And why did they learn it? Is because at the time, until basically the beginning of 20th century, the teaching and the studying of music englobed composition and performance. And since most of the performers were the composers, the very concepts of interpretation were foreign, because it was natural to ask, to guess if Mozart is somewhere to play not something by Bach, or if somebody invited Chopin, nobody asked him to play a Beethoven sonata. So this universality, this knowledge of the past, of so many layers of styles and genres that we cherish today, we know today, we learn today, we put on our shoulders so much of this past through our hearing of today, the instruments of today. So therefore, it's almost ambiguous to want to teach them or close to what should be the authenticity of the approach of the text, from the gesture, the tempo, the phrase, the pace, the pulse, according to indications of before metronome of Melzel, meter, and then words indication. But ultimately, once you've done the full circle, you realize that it's only what you feel about it, how you hear it innerly when you receive it from the score. So that's why I did the analogy with the reader who reads a book without to need a reader to read it to him. So the musician, and possibly the non-professional musician, ought to be also educated to learn the alphabet, even if not all people who read and write become writers. But not all people who listen to music, unfortunately, read music. It's a grammar like another, it's an alphabet like another, it's a universal alphabet for so many styles, time periods. Of course, that would intend that music as a language should be taught from the get-go, first grade and before, without that to be necessarily a musical commitment for life. It's just a curiosity of the humanities. In which case the interpretation today should not become, as it was separated from the composition, a piece over the piece itself, and people like it rather by somebody rather than the piece itself only. Or because the vector, the communicator, becomes the author, the ephemeral moment of the listening to it. I agree that there's so much knowledge to know so much curiosity to have in so many domains, from science, mathematics, social studies, understanding religions, organizing the myths, the symbols with the history and the timeline of humanity and demographics. And I mean, if you think about it, and thank God today, available to anybody is so much more information than ever in the past. And certain facilities, computer printers, photocopiers. I always wonder what would Bach, Chopin, Beethoven do if they had just a photocopier, let less a computer with a software. Or Haydn, how their life would have been, especially for Haydn, lighter, or Bach, producing so much minutes of meaningful music weekly, daily, constantly. Or Vivaldi. Quantity, quality, individuality. In fact, all of the composers we play are individuals who received some heritage where they were born, in terms of the way they received the world in which they were. But they made something very personal as a statement out of it, even if they used common language, which is a fact, tonal system. And I wonder, when the students come from so far, so many different continents, come so far, and I feel such responsibility that the few minutes will be meaningful enough, if not on the spot, rather like a grain that will have a later harvest, combined with all other information, influences, emotional connections, analytical, cerebral understanding of the music, the tonality, the rapports, the balances, the systems of repeat within the motivic elements, or the repeat in the structure, and what it means in order to play it for what it is, or what it is becoming importantly to you. Because if you're just preparing them to recite correctly, their recitation is not believable. It has to become, by persuasion, their own conviction, because if they're not inspired, they cannot be inspiring. They'll be at best cautious, organized, and it's necessary to teach them. That's what I try to do too, because they will play on all the pianos, on any pianos, auditions, juries, exams, competitions, and more, lifelong. They have to have a touch control that allows them, through fingerings that are more secure than others, but that are so individual to their morphology, while the keyboard is the same for all in terms of size. But the action is different, the acoustics that they receive for the action, the feedback, matching the inner hearing expectation with the production of the reality of the performance, without to have this fracture in between, or disappointment by the fact that, I did so much and still nothing came out like I wanted. All my intentions didn't come through. So when the intentions, let less the apparent solutions, are captivated, are captured, are picked up, are enter directly from the soul of the performer to the soul of the listener, it's an amazing moment of grace. Probably in an unawareness of all the parties involved. It's reflective and disruptive to do music. The music itself talks to you, and you become as a performer, you have to be the most transparent membrane possible so that you don't too much influence through your personal reading of the, or psychological reading of the music you play. Of course, that's why I was thinking to teach them technique only isn't enough. To teach them musical understanding doesn't make them only play it better, but understand it better. At which point can I bring holistically all this together to give them confidence? Oh, it's pretentious to give anything like confidence, but let's say that sometimes little details of handling awkward, difficult, uneasy sections, which are different for different students, it's already a key to a solution on the grander scale. By relieving from worries, nervousness, the student, because you become a little more confident that no matter where, what, on which piano, this section will go through, because you handle it in a way that corresponds ergonomically fingered, the gestures, the anticipation of the whole extraction of the sound according to if it's octaves, thirds, repeated notes, trills, mordents, arpeggios, scales, who knows what, chords. As if the making of the playing itself, the industry of playing, which is separate when the conductor doesn't play, but the orchestra plays what the conductor implements and anticipates by even conducting a bit ahead, to bring the capacity of the student's own creative re-storytelling, re-narrative, even if the piece has already been very often played and narrated by so many, somehow their own path finds a meaningful way. It's not like one more of the same interpretation of the same famous piece, because it's in the details that things are different. A delay of a note, a breath that is not just rhythmic, a rest that is not only an interruption of sound, but it's in fact like a black hole in the universe. It's an intensity which releases the sounds rather than the capacity to shut down the sounds. And so the interruption of the sound, like when you bite an apple, becomes by itself a contour of a shadow, of an invisible way of the notes shaping the value rhythmically of the note. Of course, the decay of the piano has to be taken in account compared to an instrument like a string or voice that can make a vibrato while holding it. Not all pianists are in denial, but many are, me included, that you can do on the piano. Singing, when it's a percussive instrument based on a hammer hitting strings which by vibration produce this resonance. So in fact you play in the exhaling of the sound, in the resonance, you produce the sound which is heard after you strike the note from close up, from above, or on the key, or the edge of the key, whichever way you are more productive and more precise to play what is demanded by the dynamic range or the very range of the instrument's very large range. That's the moment where you bring to life ephemerally all this construction that is lying down on the paper. And therefore, it's so meaningful, because while we read the same, more or less, this or these editions have details that differ because of different authenticity competition, but regardless, and I really, really think it's very important to be as authentically close to the thought of the composer just because of the humility of serving the muse correctly. But that should not and cannot be, well, it's a motivation, justification, but I don't think it's an end in itself. I think it's an ingredient towards what it means to you as a performer the moment you play it. So you have heard operas, symphonies, paintings that you saw of the period or around. You have studied about history if you're curious. What happened when they were writing this piece? Does it or not have an incidence to the creative juices of the composer? In which time period this composer was placed by serendipity? Sometimes one is stricken by the unrelated situation between the composer's inspiration and the situation in which a composer was placed. Personal life, history, events they cannot manage as an individual. While, on the other hand, sometimes some of composers are able to translate through sounds the soul of people, either to whom they belong, either by election, by choice, either by, it's not about genetic code of music, but cultural appropriation. So there is a level of globalization for goods and trade, but there is also a globalization in the art tastes. And the idea that the folklore existed before classical music was notated because it was the functional music for society on the oral tradition of the transmission of the songs, dances, rituals, to pray, to bury, to when born, to marry, to celebrate a birthday, to celebrate life in all its forms. It's like a music being the soundtrack of their lives. And then when notated by more elaborate musical notation, it detaches itself from its popular root of the oral transmission and becomes something more stylized. So you have stylized dances in the Baroque for the suite of dances, as you have stylized arias on the piano or the keyboard before the piano, the harpsichord for the piano, the clavichord, the lute before that, and through, I mean, nothing is just one after, it's an accumulation of different ways of touching people's hearts through the instruments, playing as a symbol or as an avatar for the voice, singing, the emotions, the hopes, the sadnesses, the exaltation of soul, or the reflectiveness, or storytelling, playfulness, and then on the other hand, the instrumental organization of structures. For instance, if music is the reflection of nature in sounds, you organize them in other sounds, so you can imitate a river, a fire, and then you can invoke a sunset or a sunrise that's already more abstract. But you can convey it even without lyrics on the piano. With the orchestra or the different instruments, their timbres already shape you to predispose you to to a character, to a mood, to an atmosphere. You're already sort of programmed when you hear a bassoon play staccato, or an oboe play legato, or an orchestra string section play warm orchestra chords in the bottom or the mid-range. You feel some kind of warmth, or the brass projecting, or the wind playing individual solo instrument arias within a symphony of a work, which could be also an opera, a ballet, a mass, a requiem, an oratorio, voice and dance and play in a storytelling of an opera today, perhaps in a 3D video game, whichever the medium. You have this compiled organization of different arts that sort of complete each other to convey the story that you could just read by yourself silently, like a book, if it were, as I said earlier, in a music reading capacity by yourself. The score, you hear it without to need somebody to make an interpretation of it for you, and you hear it for what it means to you, for what you can understand from it for you. And then you close the book and you don't need somebody to play it for you. And if you study how to, then you learn how to play it. Then you have choices of different ways of playing it until you find which one is meaningful to you. The famous, I like it this way, or I rather not do this, or I hate when people do that, so therefore by rejection of what I don't like in people playing the piece I like to play, I will play it the way I think is meaningful. And that, I think, is a very beautiful shaping of the mind. And by choices, people, it could also change mind, but it takes several decades, possibly through a lifespan of being acquainted to a certain art form. You develop, you evolve as a human being by all other informations in life, or just the way your own life goes on personally. You discover more about levels, layers of love, of giving, of self-giving, of egotism even. At all levels, everything happens. Nothing is just one or the other. But it is really factual that when you play a piece of music, in a way you play your life, extracted, naturally not involved, but extracted from it. You cannot separate yourself from doing it, from what it means to you. Wrong or right, according to this or this scholar. And therefore, the moment where I teach, I feel like I have to be very careful to suggest by experience, not only influenced by conviction, because I find that some approaches of an articulation surprise me when they bring me as a student a piece that they discovered or they started, compared to me having known it for decades, which doesn't make me know it better or more rightly than them, because I'm very humble for that. I just feel like I refer a lot to the score. Why? Is because I try to think outside of the box. What if they went in this modulation rather than this? What if they did a little longer this structural section compared to there? And why didn't they do it that long? Was it random, or is it a purpose? Is it a question of how you observe it and how you absorb it? Yes. And I find that when the music is first heard and then played, and in order to be played in details and not by ear, literally, it has to be studied by the score. And then you start seeing in the notation things you didn't hear in people playing it when you heard it, just by sounds. So everybody has different levels also of hearing in terms of the ear, perfect pitch, relative pitch, dot pitch, to connect interval spaces, to understand, to absorb the leaps of the gestures of the intervals that are suggestive of this or that emotional state or intellectual organization, like a fugue, pure brain organization versus song or dance. imitation, because it's a just organization of voices where nobody accompanies nobody, but it's a self-generated parthenogenesis, cloning of all the voices spawned from the original thematic cell. It's phenomenal what the human brain can come up with the language of music. Entertainment, background, storytelling, praying, laughing, comic, sad, part of daily life's emotions. A 3-minute song with few lyrics can be so meaningful in somebody's life. An adagio of a Mozart piece, unrelated to their own life when it was written, becomes so meaningful to them the way, even if it's not written the day of their existence, it's timeless in a way. We are aware of the styles and the time periods, but in a way it's the moment that's captured. The ephemeral moment of that sand castle on the beach before the wave of the next minute's situation. And you still keep the memory of that sand castle. It's meaningful. Of course, it's more reassuring, as I said, when a painter and a sculptor in this kind of solid art forms, they still can be misunderstood by people who watch or misunderstand their work or the intent of their work. But at least they don't have to repaint it every morning or resculpt it every presentation. And that makes the pianists, for instance, very worried. In chamber music, a little less, because they share several tracks together, so there is something to be connected to, like in a quartet or the quintet. You produce something in conjunction. But when you're playing the piano alone, practicing it alone, you have to find enough, not only conviction, but courage. Because as soon as you play, it's already gone. And if you replay it, it might not be as solid or as precise as you thought it was already, because you thought, I reached that point where now this is solid, I can add over it more consistent confidence. That, no, in a way, yes, you do that with the technique and the fingerings, as I said earlier, the ergonomical fingering choices that shape best the tonality, the organization, the topography of the terrain of the keys. But ultimately it remains an endeavor where you start from scratch to the end. You create the piece, this ephemeral structure that lives inside you before you play, that will continue to live inside you after. It can be singing in you, it can be motivic, it can be moody, whatever it is, but it lives in you. And then you exteriorize it, and it has to be right and perfect and precise and reliable. And on any instrument, especially when it's an important moment like a judgment of peers. So I think the nervousness is also not so much because of the natural reserve of people expressing such intimate feelings, even if they're not their own, but as a proxy for the composer's music. It becomes so meaningful to you that you feel like, I don't want to expose myself, make fool of myself, appear to fail the calling for the piece, which even if I heard it by others, I want to play it. It's my turn, it's my time. I rediscover America for myself. This Beethoven famous sonata, I know what it means to others, but I'm not sure what it means to me, but I'm going to see with this teacher and that teacher and this school and their school. And perhaps I'll reject all of that ultimately, or keep a little bit of this for the pulse or the pace or the structure or the organization of the sentence, of the phrase. And you cannot just play as an analyst, and you cannot only play without to think about the music, just feel it, don't think it. You have to find that incredibly personal way of combining both. What a responsibility. for the few minutes that they trust me in their life to bring them what they don't expect to know exactly, and what I try to make sure I attune to each individual expectation for themselves. Isn't it wonderful?